giving me this opportunity. And I also have to say thanks to Dusan. He really picked up our earlier catatonia work and put it into the current time and also follows the spatial temporal neuroscience. So thanks so much. I really appreciate. So I owe you a lot. And uh, for the outsiders, you may say, oh, this sounds all very abstract and philosophical. Yes, that's right. But you will see it has concrete clinical applications for diagnostic and therapy. And that's what I will turn out. And as I don't need to tell you, it's a CE, you get to the clinic through the research of the mechanisms. So the background, the very conceptual background is this, you know, as you're in psychopathology, has a long history, particularly in Germany, including Mannheim, Heidelberg again. I don't need to say that. And it's really that in current psychopathology, particularly here in the Anglo-American world, we often consider the symptoms only often at the surface, cognitive, affective functions. However, the main idea which I will try to bring forward here is that there's a deeper layer in the brain itself. And that deeper layer is, of course, completely unconscious, is what I will describe as topography and dynamic. And that's where I suppose are the basic disturbances in mental disorders. I know many terms, I will provide some flesh to the bones throughout the talk. So my talk is first, Dusan already mentioned it, spatial temporal psychopathology, whatever that is, from brain over symptoms to clinical diagnosis and therapy. So first, in the first part, I will briefly explain what it is, what I mean, very short, and then I will give you concrete examples of two disorders, depression and schizophrenia. I leave out the catatonia because Dusan can tell you very well. And then at the end of my talk, I will refer to some clinical tools for diagnostic, as well as novel approaches to personalize the therapy based on spatial temporal grounds. So let me briefly start. I don't need to tell you, you're all experienced clinicians and researchers. Compared to physical medicine, mental disorders, mental health treatment lacks diagnostic marker. When you come to cardiology, you get 15 minutes interview with the nurse or the doctor, you get 2 or 3 days of diagnostic, and then you get a diagnostic, and that provides the basis for personalized, precision-based therapy. However, nothing of that is really available in psychiatry these days. I don't need to tell you, it's a trial and error. Yes, we do have some symptom checklists, we do have some guidelines, but there's no real biomarkers. And you know, it's a big search for that. So, and what is the problem? Why don't we have that? So for my, you know, being a philosopher, you always ask the why question. Why is that? Because from my point of view, we really lack a direct connection between the brain, the symptoms, and Dusan already mentioned that experience. For me, subjective experience is key. I think I don't need to emphasize why that is so, because you're in the Mannheim, Heidelberg area where experience is a key. If I were giving the same talk here in the Anglo-American world, I would need to strongly justify myself. Why do I bring experience? So that triangle is really key for me to understand and then maybe provide biomarkers. So that leads with a paper with Dusan and Jonas Daut, who introduced some beautiful case histories, subjective experience histories into that paper. It's a crisis of mechanism. We don't know the neuromental mechanism linking brain and symptoms. And then also we do not know where this subjective experience comes from, because as you know, the symptoms have a meaning. Yeah, the auditory hallucination, the acute psychotic patient has a meaning, and that meaning makes her or his behavior abnormal. It's the same for abnormal sadness. We all experience bouts of sadness, but it's the meaning attributed to the sadness which makes the difference. So for me, mechanism and subjectivity go hand in hand. So how do we link this? You remember this triangle. Very briefly, there's a lot of basic research into going that. We said that spatial and temporal feature / dynamics and topography provides a link between the neuronal and the mental. So there's a lot of basic research which we do. I don't describe that here in detail, but I give you just an example, for instance, that the variability or the fluctuation in the brain are related to the attentional fluctuation. So this is all database. There's a lot of database by others and others. For instance, here, alpha theta frequency relationship, similar durations in off-task thought or on-task thought. Whether you, for instance, listen to my talk or not, maybe a difference in the fluctuations of your brain. If they're faster, you have a higher chance of listening to me and follow me. If you're very slow in the brain, maybe you're in the midterm dip in your concentration, you're slower and you may not be able to follow my fast speech. And then you just get into the mind wandering. Same, we showed this for psychomotor retardation in depression. Your brain is literally too slow in connecting to the motor cortex / you have psychomotor retardation. The same on the spatial side, topography as common currency. You see, it's both manifest in neural and mental activity. For instance, the unimodal, transmodal gradient between sensory regions and prefrontal regions in the brain. And that relationship, that balance is also reflected in a concurrent mental landscape of content. Prototypical example is depression, where you have more internally oriented contents, ruminations, strongly focus on yourself, increased self-focus, and that goes along with an abnormal activity in the transmodal, higher order prefrontal default mode network region compared to the sensory region. So maybe that the balance between unimodal topography of the brain is related in a corresponding balance between external, internal oriented cognition contents in depression. So there's a lot of research which we did. You can see this on our website and in this recent paper where we gave an overview 2024 about the results by others and ourselves. So now what does this imply for mental disorders? So that maybe mental disorders are specific space-time disturbances. And that's these space and time disturbance. I'm speaking here of the space and time of the brain itself, how it constructs its inner space and time, and changes to that lead to the symptoms and also an abnormal experience. So we had here on the right again with Durdan, where we really said the spatial temporal approach integrates the subjective and object, the first person experience with the third person objective markers. That's one of the key ideas here. And so now I show you some examples of that specifically. So our group, we're working on depression, schizophrenia, anxiety, PTSD, and bipolar disorder, maybe. And I show you two examples where we're the most advanced, mainly in depression, MDD, and schizophrenia. So that's what I show you now. So now this is the conceptual background, but which is very important to understand the kind of measures we apply and how we approach things. It's really a different approach, which lets you see and take into view distinct things, and a novel view, which is rather complementary. It's not contradictory, but it provides a broader framework. So now let me become a little bit more concrete. I don't need to tell you again, depression, you all know this. You're completely shut off from the context. I mean, the severe depression, what informally called the endogenous depression, again, Tellenbach melancholic type. And I think I don't need to add anything. But the question, from my point of view, is what is a basic disturbance? So basic disturbance is a concept which goes back to Minkowski phenomenology, beginning of the 20th century, in the context of schizophrenia. But here I apply the concept of basic disturbance to mental disorders in general. What do I mean by basic disturbance? So basic disturbance is, for instance, glucose. Glucose is glucose and insulin are the basic disturbance of diabetes. Yeah, and they cause the various symptoms throughout the whole body, yeah, including the brain, including the eyes and the toe, and the gangrene in the toe and everything. But they're not really the cause. The causes of diabetes are deeper. They're genetically, or that you ate too much chocolate, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so there's sort of on the intermediate level, the concept of basic disturbance between symptoms and causes. And that's what I'm trying to get at. And of course, you can imagine, I would consider that as spatial temporal disturbances. So, and what is one key disturbance in depression? I would argue is the speed. The speed is one dimension of time. Obviously, there are many other dimensions of time, but speed is one key dimension where I would argue that maybe depression is a speed disturbance. So it's not just a mood disturbance. I do not deny, of course, that it is a mood disturbance, but I think it's much more. It's more basic because it's not only a mood, as you all know, it's the movements are affected, the perceptions are affected, the cognition are affected. What is the underlying disturbance? So now I show you various studies where we showed that the speed of the brain and the mind are indeed too slow in depression. So the first thing what we did here is, for instance, we investigated the visual cortex. We have a whole line of visual cortex research, particularly focusing on the input processing. And what we demonstrated in a very recent paper just came out, that the brain is literally too slow, that the visual cortex is too slow. Here we investigated the global signal representation throughout the whole brain, GS-core for the fMRI experts among you. And we investigated that in different frequencies in the infra-slow range of fMRI. And the slowest range is slow 5, and the fastest range is slow 3. And you can see here in the depression people, you have a significantly lower global signal representation, whereas in the very slow frequencies, they're more or less the same. So it's really that it seems to be the faster frequency of the neuronal activity in the resting state, which are key. And then we further measured that with a measure from engineering called median frequency. We measured the power spectrum of the fMRI signal in the infra-slow range, 0.01 Hertz to 0.1 Hertz. And then we saw that that median frequency is abnormally shifted towards the slow end of the power spectrum. And importantly, we saw that it correlates with the symptoms, meaning the slower the neuronal activity, resting state in visual cortex, the more severe the symptoms. So, and you can see different regions. This was the primary occipital cortex as well as higher order regions like MTV5. Now you will say, yeah, this is in the resting state. How does that affect the processing of the visual input? So here we conducted yet another study, again, acute MDD patients, and we stimulated them with fast visual stimuli, checkerboard, and with slow visual stimuli, checkerboard. So same stimuli, checkerboard, but in slow or faster frequencies presented. And just focus your attention on this one here. You see the blue are the depression, the white are the healthy subject. You see again, in particular, these are the faster frequency of your visual stimulation. That the depressed cannot increase particularly their activity in response to faster visual stimuli. Meaning they're really, as the title of one of our papers, they're really lagging behind. And that is what you can see in clinical patients. They really are too slow, not only psychomotorically, but also apparently in the input process. So here's another study where we did the same, but now combined with with negative and neutral emotions. And we could show that depressed patients particularly didn't react to negative and fast stimuli, which also correlated, interestingly, with psychomotor retardation. So there really seems to be a speed deficit in the neuronal activity of the brain. They're literally too slow. They do not react to fast stimuli. So now you say, how does that affect my visual perception? So this is another study which we show. This is what is called a motion suppression task. So I here work together with some real visual experts. V5MT plus task is a motion suppression task where you get some grading, some lines, and they move in a certain direction. So it's a dynamic paradigm, and you can test when the patient's subjects detect in which direction the grades are moving. And what we can see that in depression, they take significantly longer time to detect in which direction the lines are moving. So that we showed in various samples, replicated. And then we also showed, this is very important, that we showed that that is related to GABA and glutamate. So here we conducted 7 Tesla spectroscopy in visual cortex, in the visual cortex area, MT+, which is known to mediate this visual suppression, this visual motion suppression task. And we could see the replication of the earlier findings by Zanakura, from Yale that the GABA in the visual cortex is significantly reduced in MDD. And of course, no surprise, GABA and glutamate correlated with each other. But what is important, that we could really link the decreased ability in the motion suppression task / the visual perception to the GABA and glutamate, and even to the symptoms. So we calculated here mediation models and structural equation modeling. You can really see this is a psychophysical performance in the visual perception related to GABA, glutamate, and then directly to the symptoms. So here you can really say that maybe there's first an abnormal slow input processing in the visual cortex, which then is also related to GABA and impacts the visual perception / symptom severity. So now you say, yeah, Northoff, and we have various other studies on visual cortex, which you can see on our website. Now you say, come on, visual cortex is not relevant. Relevant are really medial prefrontal areas, anterior cingulate area. However, I didn't show this here, that in almost all of our study, we see a direct connection from visual cortex to medial prefrontal cortex to be abnormal in depression. So maybe the abnormal input processing in depression reverberates towards subsequent cognitive processing. So now you say, yeah, not of visual cortex, why is all that relevant? It is relevant because here we tried, maybe we can use transcranial magnetic stimulation in occipital cortex. You know, the target region is usually dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Now there's some experiments, deep TMS with subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, but maybe we say, let's go back to the sources, to the input process / the visual cortex. So, and that's what we did here in a study, and we showed very good efficacy in visual cortex. It was a 10 Hz protocol. Since then, there have been 2 other studies which applied a zeta burst in visual cortex and showed very good efficacy. And when you look into the, and here you can see, so we compared individualized neuronavigated versus standard versus sham, and you can really see that the individualized shows the best efficacy. So that's maybe, and here you already see the nucleus for potential personalization, that maybe occipital TMS would be ideal for depressed patients, particularly with slow visual perception. Maybe they benefit more from occipital than from DLPFC TMS. So now I show you yet another symptom domain, movement. I don't need to say that in the presence of Dusan, who's a real expert on psychomotor retardation and depression. So you know all it. And I think I loved this one, this I added last night. You're too late, but that's literally true. Yeah, the depressed patients are too late. I remember one patient, a young girl in the presence of her mother. Her mother was speaking normal speed. And then later, and she was completely mutistic, not catatonic, just mutistic. And and then later, and of course, at the beginning, we thought it's a neurological disorders and something, did the whole differential diagnosis. And then later, when she recovered, and she suffered from severe depression, she recovered. I asked her, why didn't you speak at all? She said, yes, everybody was speaking so fast, including my mother, whom I knew spoke normal pace, but for me it was too fast. I couldn't follow, so I didn't speak at all. So that is really how the input is processed, and here the output. So here is a study which is in revision, where we looked for the timing of the functional connectivity. So for the experts, we calculated a lag-based functional connectivity, basically where we can see from the rest of the brain to the motor cortex. So it's a global to local functional connectivity, but time-based, meaning lag-based. Basically the delays in which the functional connectivity of the whole brain is related to the motor cortex, or just within the motor cortex itself. So this is also here we tested whether it's really motor, psychomotor retardation is just motor within the motor cortex itself, or whether it comes from outside the motor cortex. And the answer is clear. It is the delay in the functional connectivity from the global brain to the motor cortex, which makes the difference. And here we compared a 3-set data set, agitated MDD, retarded MDD, and healthy subjects. And you see the blue ones, so these are the time delays. Here you are too late in your global functional connectivity to the motor cortex. Here you are too early. And you can see the healthy subjects are in the middle, so they're quite precise. The retarded, you see here, the green ones are more on the delayed side, whereas the agitated here, the blue ones, are more here. And interestingly, that also correlated, meaning the more time delays, the higher your retardation, the shorter your time delays, the more agitation. So that really suggests that maybe psychomotor retardation versus agitation have a really intrinsically temporal basis in the functional connectivity of your brain. Here we did yet another study. It's a completely different sample, different group, different scanner, and we could really replicate it in a variation. So first we looked here for, again, visual cortex, because now we tested the idea of is the output processing, which is motor cortex, related to the abnormally slow input processing in, for instance, visual cortex. Yeah, and here we could really see that in visual cortex, here we investigated the local synchronization, regional homogeneity, here the degree centrality. Both are decreased in visual cortex of the MDD. You can see it. Here's the distributions. So that's a replication of what I showed you earlier, decreased local and global neuronal activity in the visual cortex, which again correlated with the retardation scores, meaning the lower your global and local neuronal activity, the higher your retardation. There's a visual cortex, and we replicated it in various samples. And then we looked for the functional connectivity from visual cortex to the motor cortex, and that correlated highly significantly with the psychomotor retardation. So what we can really see that maybe psychomotor retardation is not yielded within the motor cortex itself. The motor cortex is affected, but apparently secondary due to abnormal global connection, in particular from the input regions like the visual cortex. So maybe it's an abnormal slow input processing, which then reverberates through the motor cortex. And here I show this directly in the mediation model. You can see global activity, degree centrality in the right visual cortex, MT plus V5, and then the functional connectivity to the motor cortex, BA4, and that predicts the psychomotor retardation. This is a full mediation model. So here you really see it's not purely motor, it's literally psychomotor related to the abnormally slow input processing. Now again, maybe that how can we make the motor cortex faster? So here we conducted another study in TMS, this time in the motor cortex. So we did a non-inferiority trial comparing DLPFC motor cortex with MC motor cortex, and we showed equal efficacy. So again, here you can really say that may be later a case for personalization. I will come back to that towards the end of my talk. So now you say, yes, Northoff, a little bit of perception, a little bit of movement, but the real thing in depressions are thought and emotions. That's what you have to tackle. That's where you have to show your strange time-space stuff. And if that works, then maybe you have a chance that we may believe you. So here, this is, of course, a completely new territory. But here I show you one example that we literally can show that the thoughts are literally too slow in depression. How do you measure thought speed? You measure that through the degree of change. If nothing changes, your speed is too slow. If the car always stands at the same spot or only moves very, has only a short moved on the German highway without traffic jam, then it's too slow. And so, and how can we measure that? Here we have a paradigm which goes back, we adapted a paradigm by von Hardenhuser 2011 about thought. So subjects are shown that they have to judge whether their thoughts are more internally oriented about their own self or more externally oriented about the external environment. And you can change that in front of the screen. And then you get a time series, and out of the time series and then the subjects have to click when their thought changes. So you get a time series out of these clicks when the thought content change. And then out of that, if you have a time series, you can calculate a power spectrum. And that's exactly what we did. So we had sufficient number of data points and we calculated a power spectrum. So here's the frequency, here's the power, and you can literally see, you can see this is all kinds of faster frequencies and more powerful, less powerful. In the healthy subject is a single subject power spectrum, and that's what you expect. Sometimes you change more, sometimes less, sometimes you remain more in the talk. If my talk is too boring, you will not change much, you just dwell in your inner thoughts and say, oh God, is all this boring, and so on and so forth. Now look at the depression. So there you see much less power in the thought change prospect, and it's slower. Look at this, yeah, it's really much slower. And here is a bipolar patient, is sort of like the depression, but somewhere intermediate. So now I show you some of the statistics which we did. So you first can calculate, of course, the power. And as already shown in these examples, the power of the thought change is less in MDD and BD. And I think, though we didn't show this here, but this goes very well with the experience of I have no energy. Yeah, Feldman-Barrett even considers brain as an energy disturbance, and I think she's right in a way. And I think Thomas Fuchs does this from a very different view with this concept of conation. And then what is interesting here, the frequency of thought changes. How often do they change rather slow or very fast? And you can see that only the depressed slow to slower thought change. So they more remain in the same kind of thought than the bipolar and the healthy. And in the bipolar, it makes sense because they can later switch to mania. But you can already see here, there may be a differential diagnostic marker here, which may distinguish depression in bipolar and MDD. Here they share, they're both depressed, so less power, but maybe the frequency of their thought changes is different. So they have a similarity, marks them as both depressed, but there's also difference BD versus MDD depression. Here, we further did a mediation model. As you can already see, I'm a big fan of mediation models. Again, full mediation model from the power spectrum of your thoughts to the BDI severity back depression inventory to the rumination. So here you really see, sorry, it's a partial, that you can really see the basic fundamental nature of this dynamic deficits in your thoughts. It's not a consequence of your depression severity, it underlies it. And that's important for my argument of the basic disturbance. So then summarizing, we have various other findings you can look on our website. What is depression? So for me, in a recent editorial in fall last year, I'd finally dared to say, okay, depression is a speed disorder. So it's not just a mood disorder. I do not say that it is not a mood disorder that would be suicide. But I'm saying it's more, there's something more basic than just a mood disorder. Yeah. It's also a cognition disorder, it's a perception disorder, it's a movement disorder. And what unifies these different features? The speed. That's why I'm saying it's a speed. And in this article, I don't go into detail, no worry. Basically, we short out that really provides diagnostic markers, both on neuronal levels as well as on psychological levels. And as you could see, for instance, in the thought, it's the same kind of temporal dynamic markers. I completely neglected the topography here. You can see another paper which I wrote with Dusan very recently, is depression, a global brain disorder with topographic reorganization. So, and that's really abnormally slow speed that drives it, and you can measure that in different ways. I spare you the detail. And that leads to various markers on both neuronal and psychological levels. And as you can see, we investigate the neuronal and the psychological level in slightly different terms with novel markers, which we use, which can be applied to both neuronal and psychological levels. And I neglected the subjective side of things. So here we developed, for instance, a scale for the subjective time and space experience. I'm a big fan of phenomenology. I was initially trained in Heidelberg some years. However, I'm for phenomenology in a clinical application context. And that's important. So meaning I try to bring in develop self-report scale for time and space experience. And here we did this, for instance, for depression and anxiety. Here we also for psychosis. I'll come back to that later. And with that scale, it includes different items for time. Let's say, for instance, irregular, things are too fast in anxiety. And what we could is an initial thing here, but you could see we distinguish high anxiety, high depression, high anxiety, low depression, low anxiety, high depression, low anxiety, low depression. And here's are the scores of our scale, normalized scores. And you can see that the two high anxiety groups are really distinguished from the low anxiety groups across whether they have low or high depression. So that suggests maybe some phenomenological specificity of our time and space subjective items for the anxiety versus depression. And you can see quite a good prediction of anxiety. This was assembled about 70, 80 subjects. So together, and I showed you some indications that bipolar, that agitated versus retarded depression, remember the global functional connectivity in the motor cortex could be distinguished. Here, it's a list. This is again this depression as a speed disorder. We show various differential diagnostic markers between MDD and BD, both on psychological level and neural dynamics. And also, I will come back to that in the second part of my talk for schizophrenia. So meaning there are various candidates for time-space biomarkers on both neuronal and psychological levels. You try to develop them, and I would be happy if others are interested in joining us. And you will see I want to use these for personalizing later the therapy. I will indicate, I already indicated that earlier, and I will flesh that out a little bit more later. So I showed you depression. Maybe it's a speed disorder, not just a mood disorder, a speed disorder. But then in Northoff, you say, is that really specific for depression? Of course, the question of specificity we need to address. Because, I mean, all the neuropsychological testing, as brilliant as all these tests are, they do not yield diagnostic specificity. You have central executive deficit in psychosis, in depression, in anxiety. You have attention deficits. So these tests have been done, and seeing these development over the last years is one of the main reasons, the unspecificity of many of these observations that led me to develop this spatial temporal approach. So now the litmus test, how about schizophrenia? So you will see, I will say psychosis schizophrenia is a disturbance of temporal precision. And when I speak of temporal precision, I really mean temporal precision in the millisecond. So imagine if my speech would sometimes come too early, sometimes too late, you would be confused. And we all know this when the Zoom or the Skype cracks, sometimes it's millisecond too late, and you'll be confused. If that happens all the time, you probably come up with strange meaning generations. So, and that's what we argue, and I will show you the findings. So schizophrenia, maybe it's a temporal imprecision in the millisecond range. So here on the right, this is a paper from a very recent paper in Nature Psychology Reviews about temporal features of attention, temporal attention, as I say. If you're too early or you're too late, yeah, you have a problem. And then you're confused. And then, of course, what do you do? And you may know this. I remember that one morning I'm in charge of the breakfast at home, and one morning the heat water cooker, the stove, and the microwave all beeped at the same time. So I was completely confused. What's going on here? Yeah, and I assume that similar experience you have in psychosis. So now I show you some lines of support for temporal imprecision in the brain. So here, how can you measure that? This is a measure, some of you may know this. This is EEG data, intertrial phase coherence. So basically, you present a tone, oddball, mismatch negativity paradigm in a regular feature. You test for entrainment, and then you can measure how the ongoing phase cycles adapt their phase angle to the timing onset of the external stimulus. And you can see here the phase angle, and then you can see a clear direction that the phase angle goes in this direction in the high, where you have good entrainment, meaning it's like following the rhythm of a music. You follow the rhythm, and important, when you can follow the rhythm very well, you feel the beat of the music and you feel great and you have a feeling, and that's what you can see here, intertrial phase coherence. Now in schizophrenia, this is significantly decreased. Here you can see the phase angles are all over. They're not as concentrated as in the healthy. Here is the second data set, the replication. And this is in accordance with other findings. Here is yet another data set where we show the same thing. So this is really quite solid findings. And as you know, everybody who works in schizophrenia knows the real replication crisis. Nothing is replicated, nothing is unspecific. So I think this is one of the really most specific findings. And here, this is important recent paper in molecular psychiatry. We showed that is not the case for MDD. Yeah, here you see the schizophrenia, completely different data sets than the ones before. So this is the NIH data set, every tone, every 1.3 seconds. It's an oddball paradigm. You see here, you see this also for deviant tones, for standard tones too, not only for deviants. Decrease in the intertrial phase coherence compared to the healthy, and in MDD, you see it's quite well preserved. So now the question is, can this intertrial phase coherence serve as a diagnostic marker? So for that, we played a little bit. We calculated a precision index. So we cut off the extremes of the phase coherences, either high or low, and just went into the middle, because we may, if there are really millisecond differences in schizophrenia, we accepted to be particularly prevalent in the medium ranges of the intertrial phase coherence. So, and look what we get. So here the blue ones are the schizos, and the gray ones are the healthy subjects. And you can really see it's a very good discrimination. Each dot is one single subject. This is one data set, this is another data set, it's yet another data set. So these are three different data sets, completely independent. Here we also included MDD. And you can see here the blue ones are the depression. You get a very good accuracy, inter-individual discriminations. The schizophrenia people really lie outside the range of the healthy subject. So our hope is that this precision index could really serve as a diagnostic candidate biomarkers. And now we are looking for places where we could conduct large-scale studies, which lay 200 to 300, 400 subjects, and really test that in a large clinical sample, which is necessary to establish this as a diagnostic biomarker. So then you say, yeah, this is task state. How about phase changes in the resting state, if there really is basic disturbance? So here, one of my very clever students, Stefan Lechner from Austria, he developed a novel method to measure phase precision or phase stability in the resting state, basically by plotting it with the ideal phase course, where the timing of the phase angle should be in an ideal sense according to the frequency, and then how it deviates in the actual case of the data, so nominal frequency phase stability. And then you can calculate how the phase fluctuates in its timing, which is also in healthy subject, but in schizophrenia it's much more prevalent, and it's much more irregular. So here he put a sample entropy value on the time series of those phase time changes, and you saw in the schizophrenia significantly higher entropy, and again then the bipolar. So this is very interesting. Here again, there could be a potential diagnostic marker. And then he did a very clever thing. He randomized, shuffled the phase onset and say, if the schizophrenia phase onset's timing are more random over time, then the difference between the randomized shuffled data and the real data should be significantly less. And that's exactly what he's showing. So maybe there's a less temporally structured and more randomized phase instability in the schizophrenia. So now you say, yes, this is really basic and this cannot be perceived, because in the 8 to 10 second milli range, actually look into the Giersch paper from Strasbourg, Anna Giersch, she did something like that on the psychological level. So how does that affect our function? So here we did a study. I probably spare you the details here. I go right away to this one. So here we tested, this is a collaboration with Josef Parnas in Denmark, with phenomenology and the ease, the experience of anomalous self-experience in schizophrenia, in psychosis, an interview, what they do, semi-structured. So here we tested for temporal imprecision by having this self-other morphing task. So over 11, 15 seconds, your faces change, your face from this, you start with your own self and then it's gradually morphed into another face, and the other way around. And you really test, and then you need to click when your own face stops and another face starts. So you really need to, this is test for really literally temple integration. So if you integrate too much, you will say that even the face of the other is still your own face. So how can you measure temple integration on the neuronal level? You can measure it by, for instance, what is called the autocorrelation window, which is a cross-temple correlation. It correlates signals at the time point T1 with T2, T3, T4, T5. And then you can see how much literally the neuronal activity lasts. And what we can see in schizophrenia, that the neuronal activity lasts too long, the cross-temple correlation, a too long autocorrelation window. That means they might even perceive the other person's face as their own self, so they literally temporally integrate too much. And this is very important. So here you can see this is a moderation model. So now we showed the impact of the prolonged intrinsic neural timescales autocorrelation window on the relationship between basic self-disorder as measured by the E's and negative thoughts. And you can clearly see that moderates that relationship. So here you can see maybe there's a direct link between the temporal features, temporal integration autocorrelation with, and your self-disturbances, the temporal basis. So then just because I know you're doing that very intensely, so now what is the biophysical basis of that? What is the biophysical basis of this kind of autocorrelation in the brain? So here, this is a paper which just came out where we conduct computational modeling. We use the Wilson-Cohen model, put in DTI matrix functional connectivity, so to make it biophysically realistic. And then we test whether the autocorrelation window in real EEG data from both mice and humans. You can read the paper. It's a very complex, very well done paper by one of my Turkish students. And he replicates the empirical finding with the rest task change of the autocorrelation window. The correlation window becomes longer during the task. Then he shows a negative correlation. But what is really important is then he can really show that if he modulates the degree of the recurrent connection, so the connection within the regions themselves, that really changes the rest task relationship between the autocorrelation window. So I spare you the details here, but what is important, you can use this biophysically based modeling maybe to discover some of the underlying physiological substrates of, for instance, dynamic measures like the cross-temporal correlation or autocorrelation window. So now the question, since we really showed us that the autocorrelation window is abnormal in schizophrenia, does that relate, and maybe also the decreased intertrial phase coherence, does that mediate to abnormal recurrent connections? So that's, of course, the next question for the modeling we try to address. So I spare you the details of that. We also look for temporal imprecision on the behavior level. One paper published on visual perception is too irregular, too random in schizophrenia, and also for reward in revision, the same thing. So you see that this temporal imprecision is also manifest on the behavior level. So as I said, I spare you the details in the interest of time. And I know so just one short before I wrap up. Also, you can measure the temporal imprecision in the time experience. Phenomenologists tell you temporal fragmentation. So that's a typical thought block. Temporal fragmentation, that's what they experience if you have these sudden phase shifts, remember. So, and we indeed develop a scale for space and time experience in psychosis step. Georg also applied it already. And here you can see particularly that item number 7, temporal fragmentation, was really different between psychotic and affective psychotic people. Again, there's a potential differential diagnostic. Here you can also see the data from Mannheim. Here I spare you the details. We, within this time-space scale for psychosis, Stefan Lechner, my postdoc who does also the EEG, he developed these 3 different facets. But what I want to show you basically as a summary of those findings, look, so here we did various kind of modeling, network modeling, and what you can really see is that the time-space abnormalities are even more basic than the self-disturbances. The symptoms are up here. So the symptoms are literally, remember my first slide, just the upper part of the iceberg, and deep down in the bottom layers, that's where you have the time-space abnormalities. That's what I mean when I say maybe time-space abnormalities are literally basic disturbances, both on the psychological level as well as on the neuronal level. So this, I can imagine, I was delighted when I saw these findings. This paper is submitted, will be. So it's really, here you see hierarchy of symptoms. Remember, there's a topographic hierarchy in the brain. Maybe we see also a hierarchy, a temporal hierarchy on the just psychological phenomenological level here. And I think that's key. That's really, there's a deeper dimension to the system. It's a latent variable which we try to explicate with our dynamic and topographic approach. So, what is the basic disturbance of schizophrenia, of psychosis, temporal imprecision? I showed you the face. And now imagine if your time is always fluctuating, so, and that temporal imprecision is manifest in subjective time experience, is manifest in the self. I showed you, remember the data, is in your action, in your visual perception, in your reward. And if your time is always fluctuating at some point, really, you cannot use, and that's important, that really goes back to Minkowski, you cannot use your inner time anymore to navigate in the outer time of the environment because it's unstable. It shifts back and forth. So you never know what the outer timings mean. Yeah, when you perceive this gesture delayed or too early compared to this gesture, of course, you have no idea what Northoff means. Why is he doing these strange things? Yeah, you probably may ask nevertheless. But so that's the timing is so key in our navigation of the environment. That really leads back to Minkowski as a basic disturbance of time. And here I basically illustrate the same thing. If you have abnormal phase fluctuation illustrated here, suddenly the dotted line is the phase deviation from the phase cycle. You can see this here. And of course, that reverberates. You do not experience this is 8 to 10 milliseconds or even shorter in that range, but you do not experience, but it reverberates into the longer time scale of your conscious mind, into action, memory. So wrapping it up, coming to the end, potential clinical tools. There's a couple of slides and then I finish. Can we make a differential diagnostic on spatial temporal grounds? Because that's a litmus test. If my spatial temporal approach, both on brain and psyche, does not provide differential diagnostic, or then you can say, Northoff, go home back to Canada and don't come to Germany again. So I showed you some of the findings, and there are various other findings where we're really able to show similarities between, for instance, depression, MDD, and bipolar, and at the same time, some difference. Remember the thought stuff, the thought dynamics, and some of the other measures I showed. And also what is important, I think it is not just one biomarker which characterizes disease, is a constellation. We need to have markers for depression as such, depression distinguished from non-depression. Then that there must be certain similarities between MDD and BD depression. And then within that, nested within that, we need markers which distinguish BD depression from MDD depression. Yeah, so it's probably a constellation of markers, and that's what we're trying to reach out, and we're trying to probe some of these markers, which I didn't mention them all, you can see on our website, and you can particularly see in this paper. And also the first study, and we want to conduct now basically large-scale clinical studies. Of course, it's always difficult to find academic funding for that. So the first thing what we're really doing is our scale for time experience, also again with Dusan, that we developed a 40-item time and space scale where we included the anxiety scale and the psychosis scale with depression items, PTSD items, and really developed a 40 items time scale. And that's now is just about to be launched, a worldwide study in different countries. Unfortunately, there's strong interest in 33 different centers worldwide. So here we hope to gather a data set, let's say, of 1,000, 2,000 subjects, and that we can really say, look, this scale 40 item self-report, simple, can be done online, 10 minutes, is a differential diagnostic screening instrument. Maybe you have mainly psychosis plus depression. Maybe you have items for mania plus depression. So it's clear and strong anxiety. So it's really a dimensional approach, and we hope it's a screening instrument which leads you in which direction it goes. Then the next question of personalization of therapy, that's of course a holy grail these days. Can we do this? I showed you one example, the TMS, which region is the best. Is it the motor cortex, visual cortex, or dorsolateral prefrontal cortex? And we have both psychological and neuronal markers for all three regions. So that's why we starting. I'm just developing these protocols that we do this for depression, and in schizophrenia we try to switch between either TPJ or left TPJ or left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and again target the regions and potentially also the frequency in which we stimulate based on other EEG and considerations. So then another line where we first try to personalize our approach is more sort of non-pharmacological therapy. So this is maybe more for mild or moderate, in particular early cases. You may know that here in Canada, we have long waiting lists. You have to wait 2 or 3 years to see a psychiatrist. And one of the things is maybe we have long waiting lists. Maybe we can also provide some therapy for these people on the waiting list before they actually see a psychiatrist, maybe avoid that they get into the maze of the psychiatric treatment modules. So here we develop an anxiety therapy, breathing therapy. You say that is true, trivial when you usually do when you look up online, you see there was a paper in Cell Report. You usually use a breathing rate of 6 breaths per minute, slow breathing. So, however, what we are doing based on our tempo measures in both EEG and psychological measures, we titrate the optimal breathing rate for the individual subject between 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 breaths per minute. And what we find, it's amazing. It is only 10% of our 80 subjects so far have 6, the standard slow breathing rate, as their preferred individual rate. Whereas the other 90% have 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, or 10 as preferred individual breathing rates. So that and then when we average all our subjects, then we come to 6. So listen to be learned, average is good, but it's not good for the individual. So that's where you need to personalize the breathing rate. And we see indeed very good results. I show you here the T2, T3, 3 and 6 weeks results. This is the back anxiety inventory. And on the right, you see the mind-wandering spontaneous for the rumination significantly decreased. But the main effect, I did not show this here, is in the immediate effects. So we do this breathing protocol in the preferred breathing rate in the morning and in the evening, 10 minutes. And we measure the immediate effects on this breathing, 10 minutes breathing. And these are huge, 25 to 40%. So here we can give the patient a tool for immediate symptom relief. I tell you, one of my actually patients whom I supervise clinically, she's an engineer, brilliant engineer, and she suffers from social anxiety. So she cannot give public talks. You know, that's detrimental these days. So now I suggested, okay, before you have to give your talk, you go to your rest, you go to the restroom, do your breathing protocol, personalized for 2-3 minutes, and then go to the stage and then give the talk. It works. So you can give the subject an immediate tool, something which otherwise you just use your benzodiazepine. So now we do something similar. Remember, depression, I consider it a speed disorder. People are too slow. So here we develop music. People bring their own music, and then we manipulate the speed of the music, and we titrate again for each piece the optimal speed for the subject. And almost all subjects say, "No, this is my preferred piece. I will for sure love the original speed the best." No, again, 90% of the cases do prefer another speed than the original in the music. And it's not only for the depressed subject, it's also for them. So it's amazing. So even if it's your preferred music piece, you bring your own pieces from the Spotify, and then we manipulate the speed, and you like another speed better than the original. And that is really, again, we do this with EEG and visual analog scale. In another line where we aim to personalize, we do this in close collaboration with Italy and with India. India, I don't need to tell you, is the heart of meditation. Personalized meditation. Not each meditation form is good. So just recently, I interviewed a patient in Italy, and expert. She's a Zen monk. Yeah, she is in a Zen meditation tradition monk, and we tried out different meditation forms, And then we said that the breathing meditation, the Vipassana, where you have to scan your body, that she didn't like that at all. And she became very nervous. Why? Because she tried it in an earlier period of her life when she suffered from severe trauma and insomnia, that meditation form, and it didn't work. So now 20 years later, she still doesn't like that meditation form. So that tells you how important it is to personalize. And the side effects of meditation is often swept under the carpet, but they're really there. It's very important. So this is what we're trying. We're also obviously trying to get into the neuromental or neurophenomenal features of the meditation, particularly in response to different meditation forms in collaboration with the Indian. And there's also Bianca Ventura from Michael. She's in Italy. Conclusion. I hope I could show you, of course, we're at the very early beginnings, that this paper, what Jonas and Dusan and I promised, that we try to overcome the crisis of psychiatry. We do not just state it and make a splashy PR statement, but we really suggest in that paper, and I think it's what Dusan and Jonas did is really nice, a subjective case report, beautiful time-space experience, and that it really links the mechanism and the subjectivity. Because for me, the two converge, and you will see more of us on the website and in the future, and hopefully also in Mannheim. And with that, I thank you very much. And Dusan, again, thank you for the excellent collaboration, and thank you for you all to listening. Thank you very much.